Hello, and welcome to the Election Protection Podcast, hosted by the Election Protection Project. This is Josh Findlay, the director, and we are joined today by Congressman Tom Tiffany of Wisconsin. Congressman, thanks for joining us.
Josh, it's a great pleasure.
Before we get started, Congressman, tell us a little bit about yourself and how election integrity became a key issue for you.
So I represent the 7th Congressional, which is far northern Wisconsin, goes all the way up to Lake Superior and the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. I've just been in here a little over 4 years, and prior to that, I served in the state legislature. My calling card, though, is I was a small business owner with my wife for 20 years, and it's where we cut our teeth. But we saw in 2020 that there were a number of abnormalities that happened with our elections, and that it was clear that we need to clean some of those things up, including here in Wisconsin. And that's where some of my interest comes from. And then also serving on the Judiciary Committee, we get involved with this stuff. And there's nothing more important to people. And in fact, I would just share this little anecdote. We had 2 constitutional amendments on the ballot in Wisconsin in April, and both dealt with election integrity. One was to no longer allow what we call Zuckerbucks and independently funded elections. And the other one was to make sure that there's an elected official that is overseeing elections, not like what happened in Green Bay in 2020, where a political operative ended up with 3 of the 4 keys to the central count in Green Bay. The voters voted by significant margins on the side of election integrity. People want election integrity here in the United States and Wisconsin.
Well, and Congressman, it's interesting that you bring that up. I mean, I know y'all had a Supreme Court race in 2023 that largely revolved around election integrity, and liberals kind of won that race. So I think it was surprising to a lot of people that on these pro-election integrity measures from April that they passed. What either changed in Wisconsin during that time, or what was it that drew voters' attention to supporting those measures when it seems like just a year earlier, the Supreme Court race didn't go the way of pro-election integrity advocates?
So I just think people have seen the examples out there and the anecdotes of where election integrity measures were not followed, or where rules were just made up, like during COVID. People don't want that. I mean, they believe in the Constitution. They believe that there should be rules to the game, and those rules should be followed. They were not. And so people want to make sure that they have honest elections. And it's clear from those votes that it's not just Republicans, it is people across the political spectrum are saying, we want good, strong election integrity.
Well, I think that's exactly right. So in your assessment, how is the election integrity in the battleground state of Wisconsin right now? I think all eyes are going to be on you on election night and, potentially the days after. How is election integrity right now?
Yeah, it's great to be in Wisconsin. We're always at the center of the universe when it comes to these elections, and would have it no other way. I would say they're better than they were in 2020. So first of all, you don't have COVID being used as a pretext to just willy-nilly change rules, as we saw in Dane County, which Madison is the major city in Dane County. What we saw in Green Bay, those things are not going to happen in this election. At least it sure doesn't appear that way. One little setback is the new Supreme Court in Wisconsin said we're going to allow unsecured ballot drop boxes. Now, I bet you, Josh, if we put that on the ballot for people to vote on, and they fully understood that these ballot drop boxes were going to be unsecured, they would say, no, we don't want that. And but nonetheless, the court chose to do that. Now, there's some municipalities that have removed them already. In one county, at the behest of the sheriff, who explained very clearly to 3 different clerks in their local municipalities that these are unsecured. Are you sure you want to do it this way? They reconsidered and they pulled their ballot drop boxes, and which is a good thing. But there's still some ballot drop boxes here in Wisconsin. The Supreme Court made that ruling out of thin air. They decided to be the legislature also, which is always the danger of having an activist court. But that's really the main setback we've had. Other things, including having those constitutional amendments, no more Zuckerbucks, You have to have an elected official that's managing your election. Can't bring in a political operative to take it over. Those changes, I think, have been really good. But I think probably the biggest thing is that there's just so much greater awareness. Far more poll watchers, far more people asking questions. Sunlight is always valuable, isn't it, on the process?
That's exactly right. It is. I mean, one thing that we believe on this podcast and in our work is that just by putting eyes on things, it cleans up a lot of messes. One other thing that we talk a lot about on this podcast is election administration. And I know that's something that you've been very mindful of. You've written some things about something happened in Madison, Wisconsin recently with duplicate ballots. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what that means, kind of big picture for election integrity?
Yeah, so to recount the story, of a voter in Madison tipped us off that duplicate ballots had been put out. They sent us a copy of what they were seeing, and yes, those are duplicate ballots. Well, so we were preparing a question, a letter with questions for the city clerk to try to get answers. And in the meantime, they did put out a press release saying, hey, this is no problem. There's barcodes on the ballot, so we'll know if if two ballots came in from the same person. It's confined to one ward, and it's up to 2,000 of these duplicate ballots. Well, after sending our letter and finding out what actually happened, it turns out it was more than 2,000 ballots. It was 10 wards, not one ward. And the clerk misspoke, and this may have been an honest mistake, misspoke when he said that the barcode is on the ballot when the clerk should have said it's on the envelope. And that's perhaps what they meant. But after getting those questions, we received rather terse answer, and we followed up by just saying, we think there should be an independent review here because you've identified some real concerns here. I mean, I checked with a couple local clerks in regards to the barcode, and they're like, we would never say that there's barcodes on ballots. I mean, that is the ultimate no-no because people believe their ballots being tracked then. I mean, that's kind of like the basics of running an election. And so anyhow, it got a lot of attention nationally, and which is a good thing. We ultimately asked for an independent third-party investigation. The city refused to do that. We still call for an independent third-party investigation to make sure that these 2,215 ballots, that none of them are cast in a duplicate manner. And so, as I said, the city of Madison was quite indignant about this, but there was a good reason why we brought this up. In 2020, in Dane County, they had the ballots in the park, which I believe was an illegal process where they were getting votes during COVID with this scheme they called ballots in the park. I don't think that was legal. The second thing is the Dane County clerk said that you can just declare yourself indefinitely confined during COVID, which means once you prove yourself indefinitely confined, you never have to show your photo ID again, which we have a photo ID law here in Wisconsin. And it turns out there were about 200,000 more people that voted indefinitely confined, including a state Senate candidate in Western Wisconsin who was out actively campaigning, knocking on doors, and then claiming to be indefinitely confined. So Madison and Dane County have this checkered history. They're wondering why we would dare question them. The reason we question them is because of their track record.
Well, and it's so interesting about that track record, right? It seems to me like a lot of these questions about election integrity issues could be solved with increased transparency. And what we see is that over and over again, some of these controversial counties just want to hide everything or not be forthcoming with information. In your opinion, do we have any more hope for this election cycle if there are questions that we're going to get answers out of Madison or Milwaukee or Green Bay or some of these areas in Wisconsin where there have been questions about process and procedure in the past?
Yeah, I do have hope, including what I answered to earlier with the citizens saying no more Zuckerbucks, no more private parties running elections like happened in Green Bay, Wisconsin. And so I really do think it's going to be better this election, but we have to be vigilant because we've seen that. I mean, when you think about it, there are people who are so passionate about this, they will do just about anything. And we've seen that in the past in the country as well as in Wisconsin, where people have cast duplicate ballots. I mean, a quick example. In my district, the very northern part of the district, in a small town, they had local elections. People wanted to win so badly that they had people from Illinois that were voting. They had a judge threw out the results and called for a new election. So we know people will be very passionate at times, and I mean, passions are running high here for the November election, right? And people will sometimes do anything in order to help their side. We need to make sure that there's full transparency and that people are following the rules.
It's interesting. There was a big article that came out today. I don't know how credible the news source was, but it was cited a lot nationally about how election deniers are filling poll worker spots. And they cited Wisconsin as one of the main places where this is happening. And I know, in my opinion, people just deciding to get involved in elections, it doesn't mean you're an election denier, right? I think people just want to get involved in the process going forward. But what would you have to say for all of these first-time poll workers, poll watchers, people that, saw things that they didn't agree with in 2020 and they want to get involved in the process now? What would you say to them if they're doing it for the first time in this presidential election?
The first thing I would say is cautionary. I would say, know the law. Know what your ability to, if you're a poll watcher, something like that, know what you can do. Do not exceed the law, because that's what we're saying as conservatives, is that we want everybody to follow the law, as it has not been at times. You should also make sure, know the law, follow it closely, and then thank you for participating in it. But you use the phrase election denier. That is meant to force people into believing that they're guilty, that they should not be doing this. And there's nothing worse than that, is to say to people, to call them names or use epithets to describe them in an effort to deny them from being able to do what they legally should be doing.
So I think your comment on the term is exactly right. Even in the article, it mentioned that people were just filling roles that they're authorized to do under the law, and calling people names for filling a statutory role just doesn't make any sense.
Well, and with your
Please.
The Texas Public Policy Forum, I think about the Texas case from 2020 that is regularly hurled at me for signing on to that amicus brief. And I always say to people, it was not to disenfranchise voters. It was to make sure that we had an honest election. Texas had every right to say, hey, what you people are doing in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and other states, you've actually had your election officials break the law. That's all we're questioning. And it is clear in Wisconsin, a few people broke the law. Now, would have that changed the outcome of the election? Probably not. Possibly not. But nonetheless, if I'm Joe Biden, I'm saying, hey, I want to make sure that I am viewed as a legitimate president, as anyone, whether it's Republican, Democrat, or anything else. You want to make sure that you have a fair process that's open, transparent, honest, and then the partisans on the losing side say, okay, we lost fair and square. That system has always worked here in America.
That's exactly right. So going big picture for a minute here, one big topic for this election cycle is non-citizen voting and the SAVE Act. And I know it's something that's come before Congress. Tell us a little bit about how big of an issue you think non-citizen voting could be this election cycle, and what the SAVE Act will do to prevent that.
I think you just have to look at a couple things. Over 10 million people have come in illegally into this country. I mean, there's a great chance that someone may do this. And by the way, some people may do it inadvertently. Let's take one of those passionate ballot harvesters that are out there. And by the way, Wisconsin has ballot harvesting is legal. And they go through the form to register, And it's just check the box. If you have somebody that has very limited English or perhaps no English at all, and they just go ahead and check the box. It's no big deal. You're fine. Those type of things can be abused. The SAVE Act helps end some of that abuse by having it be proactive, that you have to say that and prove that you are a citizen in order to register to vote. It's a common sense thing. I think if you put it to the vote of the American people, it'd probably be a 70 to 80% issue that only citizens can vote. The second thing is we are seeing non-citizens who are registered to vote in the thousands in various states where we've looked at it. Texas, Ohio, Virginia, Oregon, Arizona, all have, in many cases, hundreds of people, adding up to thousands total, and these being many of the bellwether states that have non-citizens that are on their voting rolls. It is clear these voter rolls need to be cleaned up. And by the way, that is the second thing, Josh, besides making sure that you identify that you are a citizen in order to register to vote. It requires the states to clean up the rolls like some of these states have done to make sure that there are no non-citizens that are on their voting rolls.
Yeah, it's an interesting question because we don't know the scope of how important it's going to be, but we know there are a lot of non-citizens out there and we know they're being targeted. I mean, that's been documented as well, not only to register to vote, but to get out and vote. So I think it's a topic that we really need to keep pushing even after this election. Congressman Tiffany, you've been exceptionally generous with your time. One last question for you. In 2020, the election in Wisconsin didn't end on election day. It went past that. What are your predictions, not for the outcome of this election necessarily, but what are we going to see in 2024 election integrity wise, both in Wisconsin and nationally? Are we going to see an end on election day? If not, how much longer is it going to take? What are your thoughts on what we can expect to see?
Well, we sure hope that doesn't happen and that it is a decisive election. And I think it is going to be a decisive election. But to me, the bigger concern is you look at, like, in Congress, we probably will not know the majority in the House of Representatives on election night because you have states like California and New York that take weeks to figure out who won an election. Why we are not using Florida as a model for elections across the country is beyond me. After what happened with hanging chads 20 years ago, and then the fixes that Florida put in place to make sure that they have good, honest elections, every state should be adopting that. That way we know the results quickly, and we know that we can count on those results to be accurate. What's going on in California and some other states is just it is for one of the proudest republics that has existed in the history of mankind. To have a state that operates in such a way is really a disservice to the American people.
It really is. And we hope your prediction of a wide margin comes through. When it comes to election integrity, that's what we're all hoping for. Congressman Tom Tiffany, thank you for your time. You've been an excellent guest.
Josh, good to join you.
This is Josh Findlay with the Election Protection Podcast. Thanks for joining us.